and thank you for joining us for this important discussion, how to support wellbeing in a distributed workforce. This is a challenge faced by many companies, particularly in sectors like construction, engineering, and retail. Our guests today bring first-hand experience as they grapple with this every day. Lawrence Webb is Director of Safety, Health and Environment Strategy for Costain. Hi, Lawrence, one of the UK's leading sustainable infrastructure solutions companies. He's also in his year as President of the Institution of Occupational Safety and Health. Catriona Dunning is Head of Human Resources for independent hire company Gap Group. Hi, Catriona, which employs over 1,000 workers across multiple UK sites. And Marcus Herbert is Head of Wellbeing for the British Safety Council, which develops training courses to support managers by bringing those two pillars of health and safety and wellbeing together. As always with our conversations, if you have any questions for the panel, please do put them into the comments and we'll answer them as we go along. So Lawrence, Catriona, Marcus, thank you so much for joining us today. Perhaps I could just get you to expand on the very brief introduction that I've done to talk about how the challenges are that you face as different people in this industry around this challenging of supporting well-being. So Lawrence, first of all, how does Costain cope with that and the challenges that you face around this?
Yeah, thanks, Jane. It's an interesting question because Costain, I think, is traditionally known as a construction and civil engineering organisation, but our client base is constantly changing and evolving, which means that now we're working under other people's remits. We're very distributed right across the UK, from locations in people's offices through to the middle of nowhere. And of course, you know, COVID came along and just changed everything. I mean, in the space of a week, we all suffered that huge sort of behavioural change that was needed to adapt, that would normally take years. So we were lucky in terms of the fact that when everything did change, we were already dabbling with hybrid working, being more agile and so on. But I think that the main thing for me is making sure that you actually know your workforce, you know your people as individuals as much as teams. And you know what their drivers are and what their motivators are, because if you want to support them in the world of well-being, you need to actually know what that means to them and have a strategy that actually positions them in the center, but makes absolutely the most of all the different opportunities you've got as an organization. And you can't do it if you don't understand yourself.
And you're Head of Safety, Health and Environment. Where does well-being fit into that?
Well, for us, it's actually at the forefront of our strategy, because our strategy is known as WISE, which is not us trying to be clever. It's actually well-being deliberately at the front of the strategy, with safety and environment. And the two I's in WISE are about innovation and inclusion. But we actually have an approach where we talk about people, being safe, being green, but also being well. And what we've done is just to try and keep things easy for people. We've put occupational health, mental health, well-being, all of those things under a single banner, but they are dealt with independently because they are different. Occupational health and well-being are different, but very much interrelated. So we just try and keep it really, really simple, but make sure that everybody's got the tools, the support, and the signposting they need.
And Catriona, a Gap Group, you're independent hire, so you've got people presumably delivering equipment, like with Costain, lots of different types of clients. Yeah. How do you approach this as well?
Probably very similarly to Lawrence at Costain, to be honest. You know, having people, whilst we don't have remote workers in the true sense, we do have people out on their own every day. And they will have a base, but they can feel detached from that base when they're not there working alongside colleagues every day. So I think keeping connected with them in every way possible is really important. They're not sitting in front of a laptop every day, so they don't have the same access to signposting or communication in the same way that people working in an office would have. So I think it's being adaptable and flexible in terms of how you communicate with the workforce, and bearing in mind that different people, different generations communicate in different ways and want to hear from you in different ways. And it's having that adaptability and flexibility and listening and asking people how they want to be communicated with. And to Lawrence's point, knowing people and your managers being very close to their teams and understanding them and recognizing when there may be a problem, because people don't always talk. Well, we know that people are not always keen to talk about how they're feeling, especially in the construction industry. It's, historically, it's very, male orientated, and people don't always feel comfortable talking about their feelings. So it's giving them confidence to be able to talk to their manager when they need to.
And Marcus, the British Safety Council, you very much try and bring this together, don't you? Because there is a risk, isn't there? There is actually a risk to, risk of accidents, risk to, lots of sickness and absence in the workforce if you're not looking at this, as well as tagging it to that health and safety piece.
Yeah, so obviously within British Safety Council, we have been helping organisations that have either a medium or high risk of health and safety incidents for over 60 years. But it's only really been recently that we've been bringing in well-being as a conversation to do with health and safety. And it's because, ultimately when you look at the research of factors that might impact or increase the risk of an accident or injury happening within the workplace, somebody that's struggling with either mental health or mental issues, whether it's diagnosed or whether it's just an acute issue, or if individuals have physical ailments or musculoskeletal injuries, or a recent back strain from lifting their child at the weekend, these are things that actually can increase the chance of accidents and injuries happening within the workplace. And when we're talking about well-being, the ultimate goal of any organisation that's working in well-being ideally should be primordial prevention. So preventing the onset of risk factors in the first place, rather than where we currently operate, which is more on the treatment side of well-being, which is we now have a workforce that have all these needs with their mental health and their physical health and their financial well-being. And so we're going to provide all of these benefits and useful resources to help address something that's already developed. And of course, health and safety do a really good job of identifying risk, putting action plans in place to prevent accidents and injuries happening. And that's where it's actually quite a natural evolution to take the learnings from health and safety and actually apply them to well-being, but use well-being as an anchor to show that if we improve this, then we help to prevent the risk of accidents and injuries.
And Catriona, just sort of picking up on that, you mentioned there the sort of isolating aspect of the work when you have got people traveling around delivering equipment. Did you start with the sort of the health and safety risk and build the well-being piece off the back of it? I know obviously you Gap Group, you use our platform as part of your strategy to kind of deliver preventative content and advice in, roundtables like this, webinars like this. But where did you actually start to sort of build that out?
I think it's been quite holistic, to be honest. I mean, the HR function works very, very closely with their risk and compliance team, and I think having that sort of collaborative approach to well-being, whether it's physical or mental well-being, is really key. I think, back to my point about asking employees, we have carried out employee engagement surveys to find out what affects people, what help and support they want, how they want that help and support is really key. So I think starting at the point where you're asking people what support and help they need and in what format is really important. I think at the onboarding, when we're onboarding employees, I think sharing your company's values and what's important to employees and to the business, and having that joined up thinking is important. So I think really, where do you start? You have to start at the beginning. So I think for me, understanding your workforce, understanding the diversity of your workforce and the different forms of communication that are required, is key, and you won't find out. You won't find out until you ask.
Lawrence, this was a point that you pretty much started off with, really, isn't it? Know your workforce. So at Costain, how do you try to know your workforce? Are you using data that you're getting back from them all the time? Catriona was sort of saying there, it starts when they join. But how do you then monitor that if somebody's been with you a long time, you know, because presumably their levels of well-being, you know, can go up and down during the time that they're working for you?
Yeah, I mean, this is where the power of line management comes in, because for me, good line management has always been about knowing your team individually, not just as a number of people that just sort of happen to work with you alongside you. You absolutely need to understand what those people are like, what their likes, their dislikes, what makes them tick, and if you can get an understanding also of their world outside of work. When you've got that relationship, you know, it's all built on trust and honesty. And of course, as a line manager, one of the key things you have to do is build a safe environment for people to be able to put their hands up and say, I'm not great today, but to open that conversation, and then you as a line manager be confident enough to go, why is that? Or even every meeting I do, the first check-in is I speak to everybody and say, how you doing? How's things? And if people are saying fine, okay, we're now at a stage where you can actually say, well, why is that? And you can follow up, and they feel supported within that team. And if you can start to sort of generate that across an organization, then you actually find that everybody becomes a lot more self-supporting and open to those conversations. And this is really where we started in our journey, because we've got, like every organization, buckets of data. Absolutely. We've got next Saturday's lottery numbers, if you know where to look. We've got so much stuff out there, but what's important is what you actually do with it, and how you measure the impact of the actions you take. So we're regularly following things up, and it was mental health 10 years ago that became a big talking point for us, because one of my team at the time asked if one of our company-wide stand downs, he could talk about his battle with mental health coming out of the other side of a terrible time in his life, and the fact that he was still suffering depression. But he was always that nice, smiley person that was always good fun, and everyone used to sort of want to be around. And actually, his real life was something very, very different. And he was a member of the SHE team. He was a safety, health, and environmental professional who was an enabler for exactly this type of stuff. And he kicked it off 10 years ago. And that opened the floodgates, and since then we've never looked back, and Wellbeing has become a natural sort of follow-on from that.
And do you feel, presumably you've got, like Catriona, a very male-dominated workforce. Do you feel that, obviously, you know, we say to people, create an environment where somebody can speak up, but what happens then when they do speak up? What's the backup then? If somebody is struggling, what happens then? What have you put in place for that?
Well, again, supporting line managers to be confident and also capable of having those conversations, and then signposting others. We do have lots of mental health first aiders in the organisation, but we've also got wellbeing champions who are scattered deliberately across all the work that we do in offices, on sites, and in client offices as well, to sort of maintain those conversations, but also share the different initiatives and campaigns we get involved with. But the thing not to forget is that mental health first aiders also need support as well, as do line managers, who could be having 3 or 4 of these difficult conversations at once. So, you know, we have EAP, we have access to Bupa. We're very fortunate in all of those situations. But for me, one of the biggest strengths is people coming together as a team when it's needed, and actually being there to support one another, because that's real and that's from the heart, and that makes a big difference, I think.
Catriona, you've done that as well, haven't you? You've got wellbeing champions through the business, I believe.
We do. We have mental health first aiders across the business, and people who coach and mentor other people. And I think, you know, for me, you know, COVID, I suppose, was a bit of a turning point as well. If there's one thing positive, there's a few things positive that I think that came out of it. But one thing for me is it encouraged that supportive supportive colleague peer-to-peer supports, because people were suddenly working more remotely than they had been before, and you had a very diverse workforce. You had people who were in work and people who were out of work, and that almost forced people to stay connected. You automatically assume, I think people assume that people are talking to each other and they're connected, but actually in some cases they're not. And I think for me, that was a real eye-opener for the business to say, actually, we can do more. We do a lot, but there's a lot more that we can do. And how can we improve, and how can we make that better? And that, well-being champions and having platforms and signposting people to help is really key, and giving them the tools to almost self-help as well. We need supportive people in the business, and we need people in the business who are in front of people and can recognize where people have a potential issue, but also giving people who might not feel comfortable, regardless of how open and communicative your organization is. Some people just might not want to talk to anyone, so you really have to give as many resources as possible, and having a wellbeing hub or platform that people can go to and get help themselves is really important.
And that's the bit that we're kind of providing for you at the moment, isn't it, Catriona? And I think also it's a tool that then the mental health first aiders, the wellbeing champions, can also use as a reference point if they don't really know how to help the person that they're talking to, or signpost them to, maybe a charity that's offering help and services as well, because we all know how difficult it is to maybe get to see a counsellor these days, or get seen by the NHS. I wanted to sort of explore, and Marcus, I'll bring you in in a moment on this, but Catriona, just going back to this site-by-site piece, is it hard, because if somebody's working on a site down in, England, and you've got obviously sites up here in Scotland, is it hard? Do they sometimes feel disconnected? How do you create that kind of culture in the workplace when people are, maybe don't ever get to see each other? Maybe they've never met up.
Well, I think team managers are crucial to that, because they need, regardless of whether somebody's working remotely on a site somewhere or they're out in the field day in, day out, they need to have connections with the business, and they need to know that they are part of a team. They might be a remote worker, but they're still part of a team, whether that's a small team in a depot in Portsmouth, or whether it's part of the wider GAP team. So, having good communication across the business, from little face-to-face communications, or a phone call. All it takes is a phone call from one person to another, and connecting people together and bringing people together. I think, you need to have face-to-face communications with people, and bringing people into, whether it's team events or team meetings, on a fairly regular basis, and having regular check-ins with people. We're all social. We're social beings, and we need to have that social connection. And yes, it's work, but it's also, work is very much a social place. So I think managers are key. Leadership is key. Communications are key. Having group-wide communications, pushing notifications out. We have our monthly gazette where we have business-related information, but we also have more personal information in there about what people are doing, how they're achieving things, mental well-being, physical well-being, and making sure that gets to people. And that's a challenge in a dispersed workforce, where you have people who are not, like I say, sitting in front of a laptop and the monthly gazette arrives on their desk. You have to make sure that is being pushed out. And even if that means going back to paper format in some ways, putting posters up in depots about things that are happening across the business is key. But technology plays a huge part, I think.
Marcus, you help companies like Catriona's and Lawrence's sort of put their strategies together on this. Where do you start when you're working for the first time with a company where they have got people working all over the shop, different locations?
Well, yeah. So I'm going to try and stick to key points, because I know I can get carried away when I start talking about this as a topic area. But firstly, I would say that when we're working with organizations, generally there will be assumptions made as to what the need of the organization is, and they'll ask for, we need help with this particular thing. But then actually, when we drill down into the detail to establish, is that actually what is needed? We want to help you achieve what you want to achieve, but what actually is the need of the organization? What we're finding is that at the moment, many organizations, and I think probably including ourselves, haven't quite yet figured out how to entirely support a distributed or a hybrid workforce, because we're still going through it at the moment. We haven't yet got to a position where all organizations have essentially returned to what used to be their business as usual. There's still individuals that are working completely remotely, where once upon a time their job was based in a depot or in an office somewhere. We have differences between what people think actually happens when somebody's working from home versus what actually does happen. There's generally an assumption that individuals will be, watching TV or doing some chores around the house, as opposed to actually doing work when they're working remotely. When actually the research is showing us that those that are working in a hybrid manner and working remotely at the moment are actually being more productive than they were when they were working in an office space. So I guess the initial point that I'm making here is that we help organizations to understand what actually is the need of their workforce at the moment. And if it starts with, we need to define what do we mean by a distributed or a hybrid or remote workforce, if it starts with defining it and then accepting kind of what the rules of engagement are, before you then look at, okay, well, what is the rest of the need of our organization? Where are our pinch points at the moment? Then that will result in them being set up for more success in the future. And this links into two other points, and this is why I was saying I'm going to try and keep it succinct. Links into two other points that have already been discussed within this panel so far. One is communication, and then the other one is line management. Now, communication, we talk with organizations about communication very often, because it's often a failing point of any kind of wellbeing strategy. And we start with the question, what is communication? And the answer might be, oh, well, we have an email that goes out every Monday morning. That's communication. Or the response might be, oh no, we've got a bulletin, we've got a notice board by the front door, and anything that we need to communicate to everybody, it goes on that notice board, and that's just generally accepted. But then what you'll tend to find is that not everybody does have time or make time to read that email on the Monday morning, or not everybody actually goes past the notice board, so they don't actually see that there's this latest well-being benefit that's being made available to us. So you often find that when you talk with the organization and you ask them, what are you doing to support your distributed workforce at the moment? And then you spend some time with the workforce, you always find differences between the perceptions of the two groups. So again, that second point is actually understanding and defining, what do you mean by communication? And is that well received by the rest of the organization? So this obviously builds into a strategy. And then the third part is, of course, we've spoken about the value of line managers, and really the importance of line managers as well in helping to support their team members, but also with the communication process. Something else we need to consider is that when you look at the top 3 reasons for stress within the workplace, number 1 is often reported as workload. Number 2 is factors that are outside of work, so things that are happening at home that we don't have a direct input on. And number 3 is line management style. And so managers themselves can be extremely valuable, but they can also be detrimental to the well-being of the workers. And that's not because they want to be detrimental. It's just that more often than not, line managers are promoted into a management position because they're a technical expert of the role that they've been promoted from. They haven't been promoted into a line management position because they are a natural born leader with all of the traits of the best leader to exist. So they have to learn those things on the job. And more often than not, you'll learn more from your mistakes than from what you're doing well. So with line managers, I think we should be looking at, well, organizations that we're working with should be looking at how do they give the line managers the tool to support the well-being of their workers, and also how to be effective line managers. And just this last point, sorry, I did warn you that I could go off quite easily. The last point related to line management specifically, when we're talking about a distributed workforce, is that Gallup actually published some research in 2021, and it showed that it didn't matter whether or not a workforce was completely based in one location, or if it was partially working remotely, or if it was mostly working remotely, the thing that had the biggest impact on the levels of engagement of that workforce was the number of touch points, or the regularity of the touch points that they had with their line manager. So if you went from having only 1 or 2 touch points per year, which might be like a performance related touch point with the line manager, to the other end of the scale, which is a couple of touch points every week with each team member, the way that the percentage of engagement increased was linear with the number of touch points. So if line managers are just having regular touch points and, like has been discussed in this panel, getting to know their teams, that by itself, without any kind of wellbeing intervention or wellbeing strategy, that by itself could make all the difference.
Wow. You're nodding furiously, Lawrence. You were talking about communication at the top. You were talking about knowing your people. How does Costain sort of bring this to life in terms of how do you help line managers? Because as Marcus is saying, people get promoted because they're good at the job they do, but not necessarily because they've got any management skills at all. And then suddenly they're managing quite a big team with absolutely no skill base for doing that whatsoever.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. I've seen it happen a number of times, and you're not helping that person to set themselves up for success. So it's really important. I mean, we've got things like line managers toolkits, and we spend a lot of time doing behavioural analysis of any procedure or any initiative or any campaign to make sure that also, from a behavioural point of view, it's not going to be seen as punishing or threatening. It's got to be reinforcing and positive. And the line managers are key to bringing that into reality and making it real. And I think the importance of the strategy, as Marcus has said, and in fact Catriona's sort of talked around this as well, having that strategy, which is the foundation for everything you do, and it's consistent and it's measured and everybody understands it. It can be really basic, but that's what gives you your heartbeat. Otherwise, you're doing things scattergun, sort of all over the place. And I mean, one of the things that we do is we have thrive plans, because that's ultimately what we want everybody to be able to do when they come to work in Costain. We want them to be at their best. We want them to thrive. So we actually have thrive plans for each of our different locations and departments that talks about line manager check-ins. It talks about understanding your audience from a communication point of view. It talks about working flexibly and adaptively and being agile, and what the knock-on effect to the downstream impact to other members of the team might be if that's required. It talks about working hours. It talks about working from home versus working at a particular location, and it's designed to provide that talking point for everybody, but also that foundation that everybody works from in terms of what's right for them as an individual, but also together as a team, but ultimately also for our clients, because we're trying to deliver a service. And we've made it very personal, and I think that's what's made the difference.
You mentioned clients there, and that was a question I was going to come on to, but we can talk about it now. Is there does this sometimes clash with, the delivery of a project for a client? The client might be expecting something, you have to adapt to, taking care of your workforce to deliver that project. Can that sometimes be a clash around this, or does that not really play into a strategy for wellbeing at all?
Well, I think it could be, if you weren't aware of the fact that clashes are likely to occur because of working hours, demands. Everything actually that Marcus has just talked about is on the nail, because these are all the things that we're all trying to juggle and spin plates over sort of every day. So what we try and do is we work with our clients as soon as is possible, and ultimately our goal is to eliminate harm. And harm can mean anything. It can be harm to the physical body, it can be harm from the mental perspective, it could be environment, it could be a reduction in carbon. There's all these different things where you can classify harm, and our plans will always go right back to the front, because it's the planning phase where you'll get the biggest bangs for your buck. And if you've got a good relationship with your clients, bearing in mind they've also been through, or are probably still going through, this transition, because as Marcus rightly said, it's not done yet, we're still learning to a certain degree, then if you can try and align yourselves as best you can in the earliest possible stages in building a relationship or a contract or developing a project, then these things are absolutely workable. And I think the world is more flexible now perhaps than it used to be once, because we've all been through this together. So we need to learn from each other.
And Catriona, how do you, this sounds like it stretches across lots of departments. It's not just an HR thing. It's not just a people management piece anymore, is it? So how have you brought different departments in your business together kind of to address this?
Through the senior management team. And I think, it has to be leader-led, because, that escalates and permeates through the business. Your senior management team are across the whole business. So if your senior management team are aware and engaged with their teams and delivering those messages consistently to their team managers, and behaving in such a way, being that open, approachable person as a leader, encourages others to be open and transparent and supportive of each other. So I think for us, the senior management team are key here. And then the team, the line managers are crucial, because they're at the coalface with the workforce. So for me, it's leader-led. It's having a resilient leadership team, because life is challenging, work is challenging, and the business needs to be resilient and adaptable and flexible, and the leadership team needs to be resilient, flexible, and adaptable, but we need to help them with that. So, training in historically in construction has been very sort of technical training and compliance related training, but that's changed and is changing and continuing to change. And I think soft skills training and leadership training and emotional intelligence is that they're all key. People, we're human beings, and we break down just like machines break down, and we need help to be fixed. So that would be our key. Is the senior and management team in the business to supporting the workforce.
Yeah, that leadership shadow is so important.
Yeah. Although there's a good question that's popped up from Adrian. Adrian, thanks very much for your question. You can see it on the screen here. Do you think that well-being and mental health have become a buzzword culture that line managers shy away from? Interesting. What can we do as managers to help a distributed workforce understand that we are considerate of the wider picture? I mean, who would like to pick up on that one? Marcus?
Yeah. Well, firstly, it's a great question, because even the word there, buzzword, in itself, of course, is by definition a buzzword. And I think they are used within well-being notoriously. There are, whatever's on trend within well-being is what suddenly features in the next line of strategy within an organization. I won't refer to any of them, because I don't want to perpetuate the issue of using, keywords that drive interest in those different areas. But if we were to stay away from the well-being washing and stay away from the using buzzwords in order to capture people's attention to talk about workplace well-being, and if we bring it back to the kind of the core of the question here, which is, what can, Adrian as a manager, for example, do to help the distributed workforce? I think that's showing that he's interested in the core of helping those that are in need, rather than using the buzzwords to say, look, we're putting together this new training on this topic, come and join, and then that's my job done. It's how can I, as a line manager, get to know my team so I can support their needs? Now, this is a kind of note that I've made prior to this question, in that the needs of a team will evolve and they will change. So once you've asked the question, you've established the need, that is not the job done. That is just the next iteration of supporting the need of the workforce. So line managers need to consistently make an effort to pay attention to the changing needs of their team, even if the actual team itself doesn't change. And well-being by its nature as well is also a transient thing. It's not something that you achieve and then that's it, now I have well-being. It's something that will fluctuate on a daily and even hourly basis.
Lawrence, do you sort of with somebody like Adrian, would you advise bringing in external help? Because I know in your role, you very often look to outside the industry and outside your sector to see what's best practice elsewhere. Can you become a bit tunnel vision sometimes, and actually seeing what other companies are doing is actually really, really useful? Like we're talking, to two different companies today.
Yeah, no, I think so. I think everybody needs to be humble enough, as Marcus said, that you don't ever think, well, we've nailed that, let's move on to the next shiny ball, because it's not it's not like that. You need to be open to working with others and sharing. You know, the days, I was doing a webinar just last week where we were actually talking about the fact that the days of us all keeping stuff to ourselves because we thought it gave us some sort of edge, those days have been and gone. We should be looking to other organizations, even if they're completely unrelated to our own. There can still be some really good ideas, really good conversations. I mean, it's one of the reasons we work a lot with business in the community, because as one of the well-being leaders and also sort of, you know, champions in that network, Costain has learned so much from other organizations and the way that they do things. The problems and the issues, but also the opportunities are really similar. You just need to be open to the fact that there's always another option. There's always another way, and you know, share as much as you as much as you sort of take back, and do that with pride, because we're all on this same journey together. So I think it's really important that you're open to doing that. But it's the action and what the action means, and then being able to measure the impact of those actions you take that really makes the difference, obviously. But absolutely, speak to others. Absolutely.
Is there, I just wondered, is there particular pressure for an organisation like Costain where you've got a share price, haven't you? You know, you've got investors. Is there any other pressure that you face in a group like Costain where, you know, you might want to do all these good things, but actually the bottom line is, you know, we can't do all that because we've got to make money and keep the share price up? I don't know. It's just a sort of thought that came to mind, really, is, you know, some companies don't have that pressure. You've got that additional pressure of, is it, you know, are people going to invest in the company?
Yeah. I mean, there's always the pressure to do the best by your people, because they're the most important asset you'll ever have. And the word asset is just, it makes it sound wrong, but hopefully you know what I mean by that. But I'll take my Costain hat off, actually, and put my Irish hat on for a second. We did a lot of research about 5 years ago, which was all about looking into the way that the finance world has changed with regards to its focus on organizations that are actually investing in their people and thinking about social sustainability, and what is now obviously becoming part of that bigger ESG agenda, and sort of rightly so. But it's proven over the last 20 years that I think the investment community have realised that those organisations who are investing in their people in terms of training, health generally, well-being, giving them a future, showing them that there's a development plan, and trying to sort of retain them and not allow them to leave and go elsewhere, that's where your safer money would be, because the core focus is your people, because they're the ones who bring the character and the behaviours and the culture and that sort of extra value add over and above, you know, technological differences, advances, whatever you're trying to provide that's different to the next person. But the people is always that bit that the investment world is now sort of saying, well, actually, that's a great sign for us. If you're investing in your people, when it's genuine and we can actually start to see some of the benefits coming out of the other end, that's where we're interested. And let's face it, that's about well-being, right?
Absolutely. Catriona, the workforce is very diverse. It's multi-generational now. Yeah. Are there any specific challenges that you face around that, in terms of, you were sort of saying about the different ways that you maybe communicate, or that age groups in the workforce like to be communicated with?
Yeah, I mean, I think society changes over time, really, doesn't it? You know, and it's really essential to recognise and appreciate the diversity and different perspectives and experiences represented by different generations and different cultures. And, you know, things evolve over time, and I guess educating people to acknowledge and respect differences of age, of culture, whatever that might be, helps us all to be more empathetic, and will create a workplace and a society that benefits everyone, really. And, you know, we have to work together and create what is, you know, what is going to be the future. So we need to make an effort. Everyone needs to make an effort to understand and appreciate each other, no matter what age or what cultural background you come from. And that's all about education and awareness. again, comes back to the point of your line manager having that understanding, that awareness, and creating that culture within each of your business units. And again, goes back to the leadership team. And we as an organization need to make sure that we are educating and training people and creating that culture of openness and empathy and diversity and equality and all of these key things, because it's, this is the world we live in, and it has to be the best place. The workplace has to be the best place for people to come to every day, and it needs to reflect society.
Marcus, obviously there are lots of younger people always coming in and out of the workforce, but younger people today face a lot of extra pressures, don't they, around social media and stuff that people like me thankfully never had to worry about. So those kind of incidences of maybe poor mental health, and particularly with the construction industry, where there's obviously a higher percentage of people sadly do take their own lives. Is there a particular way that you can attack that you can deal with that as a line manager?
Well, yeah. So firstly, it would be safe to assume that there are generational differences in terms of need when it comes to well-being and the way that information is received. If you talk about social media there are various platforms, I won't mention them, which are more popular and more used by the younger generation than the older generation. And if I was to take something that's very poignant at the moment, like financial well-being, and I was to say that we would deliver, say, a workshop on financial well-being, and the content is exactly the same, and we're going to deliver it to this group of 18 to 21-year-olds, and we're going to deliver the same training to this group of 55 to 60-year-olds, the messaging and the content just wouldn't be relevant to both groups. If the session was talking about, planning and setting yourself up for success in the future with your pension, that might be better suited to the younger generation because they need to think about that in the future. Whereas if the conversation was, this is how you draw down and utilize your pension after you retire, then obviously that content would be much better suited to the generation that are of that stage of life. However, I think it's really important that we don't make those assumptions and generalize, because there are differences, regardless of age group, on what information is relevant to those groups and how they receive that information. So if we strip it all the way back to, again, just understanding what does your workforce respond to well, and then deliver on that, then you can't really go far wrong, rather than trying to make the assumptions of, we think that this group won't receive this information very well because of they're in that generation.
So we're coming to the end of our discussion, and I think it's been a fantastic discussion, and it's very much come down to the knowing your people, giving your line managers the support that they need to then look after their teams and getting to know individuals. But is there I'd obviously love to leave the people watching today with some, really kind of powerful advice in addition to that. Is there one thing that you would like to leave people with today? Lawrence, I mean, you've talked about diversity, you've talked about that knowledge of your teams, the communication piece. Is there kind of a core piece of advice that you'd like to leave for everybody today?
I think for me, the one thing that's always been useful in my management style is taking the time to get to know your people, because you can do so much with that. You can have all the best initiatives in the world, all these great tools and frameworks and this and that and the other. But if you're completely disconnected from your team and your team is disconnected from itself, then that's going to be your biggest challenge. So take the time to have those check-ins and build that safe environment where people naturally already start to put their arms around one another when they need help, and they can see when that point might be, because that's massively powerful on its own.
Yeah. Spotting when things are going wrong, Catriona, I think is really important, isn't it?
Yeah. And trust underpins all of what we've discussed today. You have to have a trusting, a trusting management team, and your employees need to feel comfortable and that they can talk without being judged, and they can talk openly and freely without any fear. And I think as a line manager myself, I want my team to trust me, and I want them to feel that they can come and speak to me about anything at any time, no matter what the time of day is, and having simple things like having your door open all the time if you're in an office, always being contactable and approachable, and knowing what. Back to Lawrence's point, you employ the whole person, don't you? You don't just employ the person that turns up for work every day. They have a life outside of work, and knowing what that life outside of work looks like, and for your employees to feel that they can talk to you about that, just opens so many doors, and it makes you a better person, and they will come to work as the best version of themselves. So trust is key.
Yeah, thank you for that. And Marcus, what would you like to leave us with today?
Yeah, my kind of closing comment would be that if you don't at the moment have a mission statement for well-being within your workplace, then you need to define one, and then everything else is related to that mission statement. So if you don't have one, write one, and if you do have one, make sure everything is centered around what your well-being mission statement is.
Short and sweet, Marcus, and very to the point. Thank you very much. Thanks to all my guests. We'll be sharing the recording of this with you shortly. Obviously, you can watch it on demand then and share it with any colleagues that you think might find it useful. And we'll be putting it on our employee wellbeing platform, Ashia, where you can also find broadcast, podcasts, expert content to help you manage your workplaces and provide that preventative early mental health and wellbeing support for your employees. Obviously, you can follow us on social media and visit our website to find out a little more. But it just leaves me to thank my guests today, Lawrence, Catriona, Marcus. Thank you for your insight. Fantastic conversation. And I hope that people watching who've tuned in have really taken some fantastic stuff back to their workforces today. Thank you once again. And to everybody who's tuned in, enjoy the rest of your day.